happening is a lot of those folks are landing in biotechs, right? That is a business where investment continues to flow into it. So, you might just see that the large numbers that were in pharma are just being reallocated to the new engines that are going to be funneling products into these super marketing multinational marketing organizations rather than just these organizations growing again. I think that might be the sort of near term, anyways, the structure for where the human resources are going to sit.
So, cycle of life, then is what you're suggesting, Kostas. I'm just picturing Kostas or Alex just holding up Simba like the Lion King. Simba, cycle of life. Fair enough. I was wondering if there's something like different this time. So it's like, no, not different. This is just par usual for
it's not AI.
organizations like this.
Yeah, I'd love it to be AI, but it's not AI. No. That hasn't even come to the equation yet.
Right, exactly. Wishful thinking.
Yeah. Hey everybody, it's Kostas.
Hi, this is Lester, and welcome to another episode of What's with RWE. And of course, we actually have back on our one of our favorite guests and a friend of the podcast now, Alex Dickinson from the Geonomics Podcast. So welcome back on board, Alex.
Thanks, Lester. Hi, Kostas.
Excellent. So we're going to do a May roundup today. So we're going to look back at what happened in May in the world of healthcare, biotech, life sciences, and sort of talk about the hottest topics. Right now, we're doing this as a monthly cycle, and just let us know what you think. I don't know if we have enough time to do it on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, so monthly is probably what we're going to be able to at least commit to in the short term here. But maybe let's kicking things off. For those of you who are not aware, ASCO just happened in Chicago. So ASCO is the big oncology conference that happens every single year, where every single oncologist, everyone in the oncology space, cancer space, comes together in the lovely city of Chicago and shares kind of the latest and the greatest from this conference. So there was actually two kind of big, at least two very big announcements, one of which is this asset or this drug specifically called, I'm going to butcher this horribly, so you're going to have to save me here, Kostas, the Raxonrasib from a company called Revolution Medicines that has done a fantastic job in terms of, at least from overall survival, specifically treating these patients that have pancreatic cancer. And as many of you may not be aware, but if you are aware, pancreatic cancer is one of the deadliest cancers. Very few treatment options out there for these individuals, and this drug seems like even a miracle. 13.2 months to compare to 6.6 months control, almost double the survival. So maybe I'll pass over to you, Kostas, to give a little bit better explanation than I did.
No, I think you're bang on there. This is the I think they call it the Resolute 302 study, and for anyone who has been online and follows oncology, you will have probably seen the session at ASCO where they presented these results that got a standing ovation, and probably deservedly so. I mean, these are pretty remarkable results for pancreatic cancer, right? I mean, I think we all have heard of people who've had pancreatic cancer near us, and the first thing you do is you cringe because that's it's a tough cancer to crack. It's one of those ones that typically there's not a lot of time, and this drug seems to be buying quite a bit of time. And across the board, I think you talked about overall survival, which I think is the primary measure for all these cancer drugs. Almost doubling it. That was tremendous. Same thing with progression-free survival. I think the overall response was the same, and then I think the other piece to it, because we always focus on efficacy, right? But toxicity is like, a tenth of the discontinuations due to toxicity, which is a huge issue for these patients, right? So, um, a lot of good news coming out of ASCO. Maybe we can just sort of touch on that a little bit later, just overall. But this seems to be a one that's going to be really important. I, I think, and not to get a little too geeky here, but I think one of the things that's really important here is that, the reason that a lot of these cancers are tough because they have KRAS mutations, and there's a lot of different KRAS mutations, and there's at least one product out there that can deal with one of the mutations very selectively, very nicely. But it's hard to make one for, like, 1% of the population or a 0.5% of the population, so on and so forth. So the really interesting thing here is that they were able to create a molecule that kind of latches on to a separate protein, and then from there is able to then hit a number of different, and stay close enough to the mutation to be able to actually hit a number of different mutations. So it again, I can't remember if it was like 5 or 6 different mutations. So that now changes the game, right? Now you're not just dealing with one very, very, very tight mutation. Now you're dealing with a basket of mutations, and it's just so it's like shooting a shotgun, right, as opposed to a pistol. And in this case, it seems to be effective.
Great. And I just, sorry, just so you know, Alex, I muted you because there's a lot of boom noise on your end again. So you got to unmute yourself if you want to speak. But on the front around this somewhat miracle, almost like a miracle drug, which is kind of great from a scientific perspective. In 2025, just as a contrast, I want to say give this contrast here. In 2025, ASCO, the big keynote in that session was around this idea that it was around something called a challenge trial. So I'm not sure if Kostas, you yourself or Alex are familiar with the challenge trial, but it was this idea that cancer patients, specifically colorectal cancer patients, when they're on chemo, there was one specific segment of one arm that had exercise. That was part of the regimen, was doing exercise, and I forgot, it was like 30-minute walk or something along those lines. So it's not super heavy. It's not like you gotta go run a marathon or something like that, right? And then compared to an arm where they were just giving educational brochure about exercising. And the study went on for, I think, almost a decade. I think the study was, and the overall survival was obviously the metrics were very, very strong in favor of exercise. If you did exercise and you were on chemo, you had better chance of overall survival. So maybe pass it over to you, Alex. Like, how do you see something like this? Obviously, you have this new miracle kind of drug. I'm going to butcher it again. I think it's Daraxonrasib, or Dara. Let's just call it Dara now,
Let's
right?
call it there. That makes
This
it easier.
Yeah, this drug obviously incredibly designed, right? But versus, like say last year, which was exercise, which just seems like something that is very, 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 very much a something that isn't technologically, we don't have to invent anything new, right? It's something probably most people know about. Now, moving forward with the era of AI and artificial intelligence, everyone thinks, oh, AI is going to solve everything. So there's like almost this bifurcation of, at least these, comparing these two keynotes, where you have someone that it's just the plain old exercise, versus now in this keynote here you have this idea of this kind of new miracle drug or technology, right? How do you think about that, moving forward in this era of technology super super quickly advancing, right, versus like things that are like sort of tried and true?
Wow, that's a really good question. Well, I think, I'm 65, so I guess I think more about these things and read a lot about them around longevity and other things. And I think one of the weirdly uniform things is the common sense nature of the important advice, which is exercise, right? And eat right. And so I feel like these trials and these experiments are constantly just reiterating the same thing, which goes back to probably what our parents taught us, which is you should exercise and you should eat right. But we also know that the society is more and more set up often not to do either of those things, right? There's every example that the food industry makes more money when we don't eat right, right? We know that manufactured foods are a problem, but they make more money when they sell manufactured foods. So there's some incentive problems there. Um, and that's important. And then exercise is not easy. Sitting on the couch is far easier. And so I think just dealing with those two things. So I think they're separate subjects, right? One of them is good for data-driven people like us. It makes what maybe we thought was just, I don't know, hearsay. It makes it clear that it's just a very, very simple case. Do those things. And so it's a good reminder of that. And I think what something I did mean to bring up today, and I think it's relevant on the flip side, was I thought a really important May announcement, which didn't get a lot of publicity, say especially to what just happened at ASCO, was Natera's ubiquitous MRD test, Signatera, got approved by the FDA as a companion diagnostic for an adjuvant. And this is huge, right? Which is, I've been digging in about the last year into MRD, and I think it's just amazing. But what surprised me is how slow the uptake has been with physicians, right? And it turns out it's because there isn't enough specific counsel on what to do. You can prescribe the test and get a positive or a negative, but then docs are, what do they do? So here's a really specific case, like a real case of the FDA for the first time saying, hey, look, if you get a positive MRD, this is what you should do in terms of therapy, right? And this is what you should do if you get a negative MRD. And the outcome, it's from a big trial, the outcome was clear, like great results. And this kind of information becomes really important, almost the opposite of the first case you brought up, Lester. So there's one case is this thing you should always do, right? Which is eat right and exercise. And then what they were doing at the other sense with these very powerful but sometimes high side effect medications, particularly in cancer, is because of the power of diagnostics, really narrow down, right? And be very explicit. Here is a measurement you make. Here's what you do if the number is this. Here, doctor, is what you do if the number is that. So say everything is great, but it's two very different ways of looking at it. But in one way, we want to broaden the lifestyle things we can do, and in some sense, we want to narrow down what we do with these highly sophisticated, but sometimes high side effect interventions.
Yeah, actually, that's a great segue to the other sort of big announcement at ASCO. Sorry, go ahead, Kostas. You want to jump in
Actually,
first?
before we move on it, because you raised actually something really interesting, and I had completely forgotten this because I read it like a Sunday morning with my coffee. Um, but it dovetails into the challenge study, which is the question of exercise for patients, with cancer. And this was a real world study that looked at 12 over more than 12,000 patients, and they looked at half of them who had gotten GLP-1s and the other half who had gotten DPP-4. So this is an older generation of drugs that would be typically used with type 2 diabetes, right? Um, and what they found was that the GLP-1 cohort actually had a lower rate of metastases, right? So they are not looking at efficacy. They're not looking at from a population standpoint, are these patients getting cancer? It's patients who already have cancer and after being diagnosed, starting these agents. And so I think I think there's always been a hypothesis around, what is the metabolism of a cancer cell look like? How does it operate? Are there other avenues that we can attack it? And I think we're just at the early stages of trying to understand how agents like the GLP-1s, and I'm sure they'll be doing some more deep dives in this, might actually change how those cells behave and whether or not they're able to break off and metastasize and do these other nasty things. So just I apologize for taking us down yet another alley, but it was just a very interesting thing that came out as I think it was a poster in one of the sessions.
Yeah, that's amazing because that actually segues to a separate topic, but we'll leave that like until we finish up the ASCO. But that's
Yeah.
great, actually. That's another great segue to another topic we want to chat on today. But just to finish up on ASCO, the other big news was data that I think it's actually going to get read out today. I actually think June, or tomorrow, actually June 2nd, is around AstraZeneca's camizestrant. So this is a therapy that specifically treats a mutation called ESR1 that I think basically all, not all, but a lot of patients that go on breast cancer patients that go on these hormone therapies basically automatically get this mutation because the cancer kind of shifts and does its thing to evade the treatment, and then it develops these so-called ESR1 mutations that allows it to sidetrack the original kind of therapy. And what is very interesting about this specific drug is that it requires a ctDNA test. So that's a liquid biopsy test or a blood test to identify this mutation and then subsequently change the therapy or add this therapy after someone develops this mutation. So it's not during the initial diagnosis, but it's along the trajectory of when this person is being treated. So back to a little bit like MRD, but maybe not exactly the same use case, but is looking at things longitudinally. So is this almost like a sign of things to come, I guess, Alex? How do you think about this since you're very much in the diagnostic arena? You know this better than almost anyone from a genomics diagnostic area. Is there's almost like this melding of two worlds now, right? Of the diagnostic following like MRD, plus on top of it now this type of arguably the more older version of a like liquid biopsy test, just therapy selection, but doing it during the patient's actual journey and then changing treatment while once you discover or something. So this idea of like matching the drug to the like what's happening in during the trajectory, it seems like it's actually happening. So maybe thoughts around that, and how does that, because we in our last podcast we talked about costs, right? So this definitely there, like now you're going to add the diagnostic cost to everything as well. So I wonder how you think about how should one think about that, if you, especially if you're coming from the diagnostic company perspective.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me of one thing, which is diagnostics has always felt like it's this what the appropriate metaphor is, but always been poorly treated because all the money was in the drugs, right? And so it's like, man, you could learn a lot, but people don't even use this $500 test before they take a $5,000 drug. Um, and so I think an interesting element is it is shifting. Amongst other things, the cost of the diagnostics has gone up a lot, right? I'm trying to think of a counterexample, but now, I mean, an MRD test. A friend got a what do you call it? A decline of coverage by their insurer, which turned out to be a mistake. But the bill that came back out of the blue for first phase of a Signatera, I think it was MRD, was $7,500. Right? It's like, whoa, where did that come from? And they just said, I'm sorry, we can't pay that. You'll have to take care of it yourself. It was fine on appeal. So it just becomes clear that these things are becoming very material, but arguably because the drugs have become far more expensive. And I think in the early days of precision medicine, because I was at Illumina in the 2010s when all this was kicking off, there was really quite a pushback from the drug companies because they really made all their monies with things like Lipitor, right, which pretty much prescribed to everybody, right? It was like these were all everybody drugs. And now, of course, these drugs, and it's a whole different field, of course, there's no real comparison between Lipitor and a chemotherapy and immunotherapy, but it's become very clear, let's say in the case of some of the immunotherapies, the CAR T therapies and so on, these can be incredibly expensive. And so and often now, the therapy itself, the utility of the therapy and dealing with both its efficacy and its toxicity is helped through the regulatory process by the companion diagnostic, may not have made it through otherwise. and it unlocks this huge stream of payments per prescription for the pharma companies. And so I feel like the math has changed a lot. And so the pharma companies seem a lot more comfortable with the idea of a companion diagnostic, and it becomes a little less about you know, protecting their drug against a narrow gate, and more about, hey, how do we use this to identify very specific patient populations? And it almost becomes a way to bring the patients in rather than a gate to keep the patients out. So I think there's been some very big changes around the underlying economics and the maturity of the technology. And you're right, these things are coming together. And I think that case of Signatera is the first MRD companion diagnostic approved by the FDA, is very indicative of a sea change in behaviors around it. And you could say it's the, I hope, useful and appropriate fruition of the whole idea of of precision medicine.
Actually, I'll throw it to you, Costas, on this front, since Alex brought this up. Do you think the next kind of shoe to drop is more acquisitions, Costas, where you see these big pharma players like a Roche, right? Like they have done already in the past, for them to acquire like these diagnostic companies and own a little, like almost like the diagnostic journey as well, like a reference laboratory or what it may be. Like what we're, because I agree with Alex. In the past, most big most pharma always say, "Oh, that's not our problem." that's like some other person's problem, right? But now this seems like it is part of their, like their is part, is their problem.
Yeah, I honestly don't think that's going to be the mechanism for continuing to push this kind of concept. I So from a farmer perspective, the ideal is that there's already a test on the market that can already test and they're good to go. If they have to, develop it as a companion diagnostic, well, then you're going to actually work with someone outside who has the wherewithal to do it as cheaply and quickly as possible, rather than you having to start up something, spin out something yourself to do it. And maybe you'll split some sort of costs and potentially the benefits of that. But I think for the pharmas, the benefit is less so. It's less so on the diagnostic side, as opposed to what the value is of that information that it brings to the table, right? Because it's not just more certainty for the clinician in what's my next step, but it's also, I mean, you take a look at something like this and you say, bring that drug in earlier, right? Into so number one, you're pulling it forward into therapy, right? So that's the first thing, and you're probably not going to end up burning this for following rounds necessarily. So there's that, pulling it earlier, but then also seeing better outcomes, right? So all those you know negotiations you end up having with pricing and entities around the world, or having to negotiate rebates, you know being able to say, listen, when you put it in the right patient, and by the way, the test already exists, you can almost double the efficacy. You can stretch out the amount of time the patient will be on it without progression. All these kinds of things now become elements of value that you can use to defend your product's value, and more importantly, the price, right? So I think that's the mechanism of value that they are lining up against, as opposed to just the nuts and bolts of a diagnostic business.
I guess where I was coming from this, actually, while you're talking, it helped me clarify what. I apologize. It was a poor question from my end, but I guess what I was getting at was a question, because you brought this up last session, last roundtable around in April, is this idea of MFN, right? Most favorite nation. I'm wondering, maybe I don't know if you want to chime in on this one, Alex. Right? Is like, now, if say Roche is probably the only group that has this right now, both a diagnostic business and at least currently. In the past, I know others had this as well, but a pharma business as well, like where you sell drugs. Now, let's say you live under this new MFN regime, right? But then you can say, hey, you know what? We're different those guys because we also provide the diagnostic, right? We are different, right? We'll provide the diagnostic super low cost for whatever it is. I don't know. Right now, you said like MRDs, like seven. Let's say you use that number 7,000, right? Well, we do the MRD for like, we'll give it to you for $100, right? So there's a huge saving there, but like, hey, the price of the drug needs to keep where it is. It's almost like you're almost swapping in terms of, well, it's like, here's a little bit of this, but we get this back, right? Like, what do you think about that potential idea there? Or I don't think that's even possible, actually. So I should
I don't
not
think
advice, but
so.
advice.
I'm not too worried about that, just in the sense that, I've gotten to know the Roche people pretty well, and I would say that the divisions definitely seem to be run independently, right? It's a big enough company, it's like a size of a small country probably. And so you can imagine the politics. It's not like diagnostics wants to give up revenue to help out the pharma side, the therapy side, right? I think they've set it up to intentionally do that. But the other way of looking at it is any pharma company can still do that just by shifting funding, right? And going, you know what, I'm going to make a ton of money. The drug's prescribed, and I think there's some of this going on already, all above board, will subsidize the cost of the test, right? That's kind of what I meant by the test can sometimes be your trying to think of your customer acquisition cost, right? To use web terms. And so, no, I'm gonna make sure that doctors know about this test and that it's really cheap, or I'll do a deal with the do some kind of deal with the insurance companies to make sure that it gets covered, whatever I need to do, because that really is my customer acquisition methodology, right? This test goes out in the hands of doctors, identifies patients for me. And speaking of economics, while you were talking, Lester, I was thinking back on MRD, and what's interesting about the economics of MRD is it comes back positive or negative, and either way, it's to the advantage of the patient, right? In the positive case, not good news, but you should be starting treatment earlier. And this was reflecting something you were saying, Kostas, which is, I hate to always bring it back to financial, but we know these terms are intertwined, right? The patient wins if they start getting the drug a year earlier than they would have if their cancer had been detected on a scan, right? It's good news, starting earlier. So does the drug company, right? That's 2026 revenue, not 2027 revenue. And so actually everybody wins in that regard. The interesting other one, though, is a negative or clear MRD test is a reason not, or starting to be more and more reason not to take maintenance chemo, right? So that actually, but the flip side of that is, I'm guessing those things tend to be on the, I don't know, older drug side of things. And so they're getting a swing towards early prescription of the newer drugs in the case of a positive MRD. And maybe no one's too bent out of the shape the fact that the patients are thrilled because they're not taking a maintenance dose of chemo. Drug companies lose out a little bit, but maybe it's not a lot of. There's some interesting symmetries and asymmetries, I think, in all these companion diagnostic arrangements, which makes them even more interesting.
Yeah, speaking a little bit about from the economic side of things, and sorry, Costas, I muted you as well, so you got to unmute yourself to come back in the conversation here. But speaking about economics here, last session we talked about Roche eating the world. Well, maybe this session for this topic we should be like Eli Lilly eating the world. I have the topic as Eli Lilly is on a buying spree. Just a little context for everyone. Eli Lilly, since the start of this year, has made 10 times more acquisitions this year. So that's 10 deals already, valued at roughly around 25 billion. So that's not the end value that like the money hasn't been transferred, hasn't been wired yet, and so forth potentially. But these are like at least headline values. Whereas in the same time frame last year, they had one deal for $2.5 billion. So I think we talked a little bit about GLP-1. Costas already highlighted that, and so this kind of speaks a little bit more about the kind of the strength that Eli Lilly has in in general in biopharma right now, right? They're just gushing money. I think in terms of how much revenue they make from just the Ozempic, or actually no, there's tirzepatide and uh, the like, is almost equivalent, I believe, to the AI labs, to like OpenAI plus Anthropic. I believe those two revenue combined is what like Eli Lilly makes off of tirzepatide, right? This GLP-1, these GLP-1 drugs. So maybe go over to you, Kostas, first, because you had a long history in biopharma. Like if you had 10 companies that now you have to integrate into like your old stomping grounds, like how is that even possible? Like what is this crazy? Like what do you make of this? 10 deals seems easy on paper, but I assume integrating these companies into the machine of Eli Lilly is not simple.
No, and I think that the devil is in the details, because we need to take a look at what they've really done for most of these deals. Um, and I would add to the ones that you mentioned with the deals that they announced over the weekend from ASCO again, on agreements with Chinese companies. So Shenzhen based, I think it's Hisco. It's one of the big entities doing early work and licensing out. So a lot of these are licensing deals, right? So what they are doing is trading off their internal development programs and internal development pipeline for other pipelines that they see as maybe a little bit more innovative or progressive. So they're making big bets. It goes along with the fact that they have actually decided to no longer talk about any of their phase one work. So all of their early work is going to be blacked out going forward in the quarterly analyst calls, right? So I think that all comes together to say that Lilly has looked at the future and said the value comes in highly differentiated, innovative products. We're not going to be able to, hit the pinata every time ourselves. So let's go out, let's get 10 different pinatas from 10 different companies and buy the rights to them. So we're the only ones able to hit those pinatas. And, like they're betting that they are going to come up with, I know it's all over the place, right? So they are looking for the next generation of metabolic products. They're looking for oncology products. They're going back into sleep. Nobody has been gone into sleep for years now, and they're going back in there. I mean, so they're making big bets with all of this cash that they have that they've generated, and if you're going to do it, like this is the way to do it, right? If you because as I will, an unnamed executive once told me that the fact that we were able to earn $2 billion for a very short lifespan product in the U.S. was not a good thing, because it meant that she would have to find $2 billion after that product went off patent in her pipeline, and she just was uncomfortable with that. It was one of those things that blew me away. But this is a company. Eli Lilly is a very financially tight company if you've ever dealt with them in the past. They are super conservative. So the fact that they've done this, they've run the numbers, and they are acting like essentially a hedge fund, going out, finding the best opportunities, taking the money and putting it to work, because they think that this is what is going to allow them to find the next product after tirzepatide, or the basket that they now have, and they are going to not only replace that but grow it, right? That's their goal right now. So that's sort of what I see when I look at what Lilly is doing today.
Wow, that's a at least what I'm reading into what you just suggested there, Costas. Like maybe twofold. One, I mean, you can tell me I'm wrong. That I don't want to put words in your mouth. One of which is the idea that in some ways they're not relying on internal R&D. They're like outsourcing R and D from what you're suggesting right there. At least I'm kind of reading between the lines there. Maybe to Alex on this front is this idea. It seems like Eli Lilly, perhaps some of the other bigger players, are taking approach out of big tech's playbook. It's really it's almost like we're going to use our balance sheet as a major, I don't want to, I guess I'll say weapon. Like we'll use it as that's our big, that's what we have, and we have like no one else has this. So we're going to use our balance sheet to our advantage and basically go out and just make acquisitions. These people do it almost like outsourcing the innovation to someone else, and we'll just grab it when the time we feel the time is right. Like how do you think about that as a former executive of one of the biggest biotech companies right now?
Well, I think the Kostas knows this area much better than I, but I feel like pharma, my impression is pharma invented this model, right? That it's got a franchise, it's a marketing company. And the great thing in I guess, the healthcare economy is that capital is readily available. Great ideas come through all the time. They seem to get funded with bizarre amounts of money, frankly, but I know it's expensive to do that kind of research. And it leads to these exits. And, I've dealt with more on the diagnostic side, but I do remember having a conversation once around an acquisition with one of the very largest diagnostic companies. And they basically, I had an early stage company. We were looking at selling it to them, and they did all the diligence, and they were like, "Yeah, this is great, but we really don't care how much stuff costs. We'd like to see it a little de-risked, right? If we have to pay 5 times more for it, in 2 years' time, and it's de-risked, that's kind of the much better deal for us." And what I learned, this is actually interesting when you think about individuals' incentives. If you're an exec, say a business unit leader in a large company, um, it can really look bad if you make an acquisition and it doesn't work out, like obviously, right? Making an acquisition that's more expensive, like I paid, I don't know, 600 million instead of 200 million, very little impact on your career. You make an acquisition at 200 and it doesn't work out, that's kind of can be a heavier black mark, particularly if it was seen by others as a risky acquisition, right? Pay $600, things in a nice commercial ramp, you can project the 5-year financials easily. That's just a much better deal. And so that's what happens on the diagnostic side. Now, I think what's different perhaps around the pharma side is getting it to market, of course, is the infinitely larger regulatory barriers, right? So as we know, you call it factors of 10, but to get to market is incredibly expensive in that business. I think much more so than the diagnostic business. And so that's why they're even better gatekeepers on that business, right? That in the end, everybody knows, I think, that you need to deal with one of, what is it, Costas, 4 or 5 companies, if you really want to take a product out to the market. So I think it's actually much more locked down than it is on the tech side. One last comment, actually, there's a philosophical comment, but I kind of love it, the theory of this, which is, I know there's good medical reasons to take GLP-1s, but we also know, like, it's just also there's a big segment of the market which is a weight loss section, right? People want to look better as they perceive it. I love the fact that these guys are recycling that money from people. I mean, it used to go into like diet fads and all that, right? It's going to the pharma companies, and they're recycling it into doing things like new immunotherapies. What a great use of capitalism, right? I'm taking this one thing and recycling the money and putting it into this other thing. I think it's kind of cool in a way. Could be worse things happening.
I agree. I agree, and I'm with you on the pharma sort of model. It's been a decade or more since pharma actually prioritized their own R&D. I think for most companies, and I'm going to say it's not everybody, but this has been the model, and it's just that Lilly has so much more cash now to go out and make many more bets. And again, they're not looking for little things. They're looking for the things that are going to make significant changes to the treatment landscape that they can price at the levels that they need, that is going to be a sufficiently large unmet need in the population that together will get them past the patent cliff. So they're already thinking this product is going to be off patent by X date. we need 2-3 years in advance to have these products to the market. So they're going to make their best bets, and then they are going to use their machine, as Alex you said, to get it through phase 2, phase 3, and through the regulators, and that's their superpower, and that's what they are going to do.
Wow. Yeah, actually, no. On that front, actually, then the question. So that's great. No, actually, I'm glad you both kind of highlighted, at least from a as executives in the past, what makes sense, right, from a both a strategy and a just a business perspective. Now, thinking with that hat on, it's almost thinking, I'm going to use your term, like let's say you're almost like a hedge fund or a capital allocator. Maybe that's a better way of saying, a different way of saying it, right? Is like then the calculus is different in terms of how you structure your internal organization, right? If you're not really doing, say, let's say R&D, then what are you doing, right? Like assume if you assess deals, you're looking for the latest information, you're looking for data. So actually, in some ways, okay, I hate to keep on bringing it back to Roche eating the world, where we talked about last session, is, when Roche purchased Flatiron, or when they purchased make the acquisition of Foundation Medicine, it actually kind of makes sense if I put that hat on, that I'm just trying to glean as much data as possible. If I understand what patients are facing out there in the real world, right, then I have kind of like a better amount, more information, hopefully asymmetrical information, to make acquisitions. Is that the kind of like the future you see, more like pharma basically trying to acquire almost like data assets, actually, in a way?
I have kind of an interesting example of that. So it's a little tangential, but I think it's in the right spirit of your point, which is that pharma companies use MRD tests a great deal in clinical trials. My naive understanding of that is, um, it's hard to show the efficacy of a cancer drug. If you can use your endpoint, a change in MRD test results, that's a huge win for them, right? It's like, look, less circulating cancer, less cancer DNA circulating. And so I heard that one of the pharma companies, I'm sure it's true of them, has a big department of people whose expertise is just MRD tests, right? And I think that's where they get to use their scale, right? They don't have to develop the MRD test, but you need to know every single detail about every existing MRD test, new MRD test, so that you can work out which one should fit into your clinical trials. And I think when you have that kind of scale, you can afford to have expertise in all the different areas that you've got to have expertise in. Whereas a company that was at a much smaller scale just couldn't afford to have, a department just looking at one subclass of diagnostic test. And I'm sure other infinite number of groups of people whose expertise, probably because they do research in the area, you could argue maybe not so much to the expectation, maybe their research would have a useful result to the company, but just that you would have the inherent expertise to be able to judge an acquisition, which is, to your point, when they are sizable, often multi-billion-dollar deals on the acquisition, you're one of your defining abilities, enabling abilities for success, is having the internal expertise to take very complex and very highly uncertain data and roll it out into the future.
Got it. So maybe last topic on the docket here dovetails a little bit off of our Eli Lilly conversation around Eli Lilly buying their buying spree. Is that on the flip side of it, the at least according to publication Biospace, that there has been actually more layoffs this year than last year, despite having record revenue. Actually, revenue is much higher Q1 of 2026 versus Q1 of 2025. And the acquisitions, not just Eli Lilly, but in general in the biopharma space, it's much higher this year than it was last year, almost close to double. 84 billion in 2026 versus 44 billion same time, rough same time frame in 2025. So close to double. So with that said, maybe it costs us over to you. Is this just the norm? Like you talked about the patent cliff, so this is just the cycle. What's happening right now is just part of the cycle, or are things different? Are things getting to the point where, we've talked already a little bit about this idea of, people haven't been doing R&D for decades now, let's say, or a decade. And there's going to be more of like, it's going to be a leaner machine. It's very much a capital allocation type of machine with what Alex talked about, a distribution, a logistics arm. Is pharma going to be almost like morph more and more into that type of organism or organization? And I don't mean to say that detract or anything negative about biopharma, but just from a reality perspective, is that what we're seeing?
So I don't think there's a straightforward answer, to be honest, because if it was just the fact that they're not doing their own internal development, you're not seeing tons and tons of scientists sort of kicked out on their backsides. That happened a long time ago. So they're very thrifty in terms of hiring those kinds of individuals. I think where you're seeing some of the attrition come from, it's much more from the management side, and depending on when it is that the patient. Sorry, I've got a little noise here on my end, and then depending on how close you are to a patent cliff, you might start seeing attrition on the sales side, right? Just based on the fact that you just don't have the same need for a field force. But it's not coming from one place or another, and this attrition started in 2024 or so. It started off, first of all, with we're cutting our budgets for this year and next. And I think, Lester, you will remember some of our interactions with pharma at that time, where projects all of a sudden were being pushed and pushed and pushed. And sort of the next sort of level of that ended up being the, we're now going to let go of heads. So it's not coming from one place. Everyone is batting down the hatches, unless they're Lilly or sitting on one of these other new agents that is just going gangbusters. Everyone is just getting prepared for those lean dimes, and they're just taking steps to cut the fat everywhere they can within the organization. It's not coming from just one spot where they're reorganizing. That's my perspective on that, anyways. I don't know if
Alex, how about you?
Different.
Well, I would just say from my experience in large companies, your premise is logical, which is, wow, revenues are at a peak. Why would anyone be? Why would, but why are people getting laid off? You can almost use the inverse argument. A large company, right? We've kind of, things are humming. It's good. We're just from a financial point of view, they're just moving their margin. I know that's cold, but often they're doing that. And it doesn't really have a lot to do a lot of the time. I mean, if things are really bad revenue wise and there's a shortage of cash, then yes, unfortunately, we do see layoffs happening, and we're all very familiar with it. But, an interesting parallel in the tech world, right, is things are booming in the tech world, but it isn't stopping them doing pretty large layoffs. And they conveniently have, it said, AI as an excuse right now. And sometimes they want that because it looks like then they didn't make a mistake, right? It wasn't like we overhired. But in general, another way of looking at it is it's easy to overhire during boom times. And then there'll be an internal comeuppance, which is the recognition that someone, it seems like, I don't know, the consultants or the finance people wake up one day and go, oh my God, right? Look at this. Look at the number of people we've hired while things were booming. And maybe it's a good thing that instead of waiting for the next downturn, they tend to adjust mid-course. So I don't know the specifics, again, of the drug industry, but I make those observations about large companies in general.
What would you think is a kind of signal that the cycle has changed, that you're back on the upswing in terms of at least hiring and so forth, right? Is it a decrease in revenue? I say that jokingly. I doubt it's a decrease in revenue. What do you think first, Alex, and then maybe over you, Kostas?
Well, I mean, two hiring up, so new products and increase in the commercial sales force, right? So if you've got a huge product launch coming along or a huge product launch in a new sector coming along, that'll cause there to be a rapid amount of heavy commercial hiring. And if you look at financial analysts, they focus on the job boards a lot, right? That's one of their lead indicators. So like, and it's a really, really good one, because the job itself, it's such a telling thing. First of all, just the number of jobs is big, but then the jobs actually, by definition, have to say what they're for, right? And it's like, oh, new GLP-1 drug, et cetera, et cetera. So they love that information. So you see that. And then I guess in theory on the R&D side sometimes, but the numbers tend to be much smaller there and much more incremental. The big surges are commercial hiring, comings and goings, I would say.
Yeah, I would agree. I think how are you going to see it? You're going to see a lot less. It's going to take a lot longer to fill open spots. I think that's one of the big ones right now. There are a load of people out there. It's not hard to find communities of people from any major pharma company who are, out trying to find a new role, and they just aren't there. It's new roles aren't being created. So what is happening is a lot of those folks are landing in biotechs. Right, that is a business where investment continues to flow into it. So, you might just see that the large numbers that were in pharma are just being reallocated to the new engines that are going to be funneling products into these super marketing multinational marketing organizations, rather than just these organizations growing again. I think that might be the sort of near term, anyways, the structure for where the human resources are going to sit.
So, cycle of life, then is what you're suggesting, Kostas. I'm just picturing Kostas or Alex just holding up Simba like the Lion King. Simba, cycle of life. Fair enough. I was wondering if there's something like different this time. So it's like, no, not different. This is just par usual for organizations like this.
Yeah, I'd love it to be AI, but it's not AI. No, that hasn't even come to the equation yet.
Right, exactly. Wishful thinking.
Yeah.
That's gonna be a little bit maybe a cold bit. They wish it was AI, but it's not AI. Great. I know we're right up against time. Thank you very much, Alex, for joining us again on our roundup, our monthly roundup, and thanks, Kostas, for joining. Thank you, everyone, for listening. If you have any comments, any suggestions, if you like this new format, give us a comment below. And of course, we're going to share this on LinkedIn and other forums as well. And yeah, feel free to engage, and especially let me know where my take is completely wrong, which is probably pretty common in many areas. Whereas Alex and Kostas have a lot more breadth in the knowledge and the experience from the past history. But thanks again, guys, for doing this. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Like, subscribe. Have a great day.
Thanks, Lester. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Kostas.